What's up guys, Noah Kwezi here, and in today's video I'm going to be teaching you guys how to create kits in Photoshop. Basically going to be showing you guys my process of creating kits or sports uniforms in general. If you enjoy this video and you enjoy my content in general or sports uniform content in general, be sure to subscribe to the channel down below. Leave a like on the video if it helps you out. I appreciate any support. That'd be wonderful. I also have a Patreon down below if you want to download some of my goods. I post all my kit designs there so you guys can get those files and a bunch of other good stuff. Before we jump into Photoshop and I show you guys design stuff, I want to talk a little bit about the pre-design process that I go through, which requires a lot of research and a lot of thinking, usually. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's a couple days. It all depends on the project and how into it I am. Sometimes I'll research for a long time or a short time. It really depends. One thing that I always do though is if I'm designing any sports uniform for a big team, whether it's a big soccer club, college football team, whatever, I always look at their past uniforms, past logos, things like that to get design inspiration, because you'll find a bunch of good elements in those things that you might like to use. Then I also look at concept jerseys from other designers to see what they're doing, so I can, one, do things that are different so I don't copy anyone else, but two, find elements in things that I really like. So for example, if I look at concept football jerseys for Notre Dame and someone makes a white jersey with gold numbers, which is something I hadn't seen before, be like, oh, in my jersey I should go with gold numbers on the jersey. Little things like that. You don't want to copy designs from other designers, but you want to find elements that you like that you can implement into your design. The other research is kind of not research, but it's just having patterns or design goods that you can use in your designs. So I have a brush pack that I use on a lot of my designs for Photoshop, and I have a plethora of patterns to reference and use. Of course, I do research on patterns for teams beforehand too, but I have my own patterns, my own library archive of patterns. I have a book here that's just a complete directory of patterns that I'll reference, that I'll look through. Template FC, my website where I sell my mock-up templates and patterns, they have all of my patterns there, as well as a bunch of patterns from soccer kits and stuff that I use all the time. It's a great resource. Be sure to check that out. It also supports me. But then of course the internet has plenty of patterns that you can look through, use as inspiration, use in your designs. The Template FC ones are nice though, because you can just kind of plug them into your design real quick, alter them however you want. So those are the things that I do beforehand, have these elements set up. And then the last thing I do is have a color scheme set up in all my colors that I want to use, because it's annoying to be in a design and not have colors for things. It's really a pain, so have your colors sorted ahead of time. I do go a step further sometimes too, picturing what I want the end product to kind of look like, whether I want like a clean design or something over the top crazy. Usually I have some sort of idea of where I'm going in the end of my design, so you want to have that in the back of your head, but you don't have to have a complete picture before you get started, because you might just stumble upon things and go in different directions. And you always want to try different designs, because you'll never know what will work. So always try and experiment with things, and if you have multiple ideas, definitely try them out. To show you how my design process works, I'm going to go ahead and design this Borussia Monchengladbach kit with you guys here. I'm just going to go through my whole design process. Hopefully you'll learn something throughout this, and then I'm going to do 4 or 5 quick tutorials at the end of this, running you through some other processes of other designs, because every design is different. Process is always a little different, but this Monchengladbach design I'm going to kind of go a little more in depth with. So let's open up the smart object. So this is a smart object right here from the body. Obviously this is a template from my store, templatefc.com. If you want templates, patterns, Template FC is the place to go. Definitely check them out. While looking at Gladbach's kits over the years, I really like their kits that have the black and green striping going on. So I'm going to go with a centerpiece striping with green and black. So let's go ahead and do that. Set up our rectangle. I keep getting these strokes on my Photoshop too, which is annoying. Duplicate it, bring it to the left. Gonna have a little bit of a gap in the middle. I think that's what I like. Gonna go with black on this one. Select them both. Gonna press Command H to bring my center guide up and just center these. Okay, quick setup. And we'll have to make this a little thinner. I like to set these up too. This is going to be a very simple beginning, but this right here is still too simple for me. I like to add a couple other color variations on top of this. So what I'm going to do is duplicate both of these rectangles, press Command T. I'm just going to right click, flip horizontal so the color's flipped, and then holding Alt and Shift, I'm going to bring down the size. So we kind of have some thinner striping. I want to go slightly thinner than this though. About there. And I'm just eyeballing all of this. This isn't like anything precise. Kind of just go with what you feel for stuff like this. And I'm feeling that that might just still be a little thick. So I'm going to thin these out a bit more. And I think that's a little better. So I want these on the right side of the thicker squares. So we have this green on black and the black on green. Cool. Let's bring up our center guide again with Command H and just make sure these are centered. And they are. And then I'm going to duplicate those. Press Command T. Same thing, thin them out. These ones are going to be much thinner. Something like that. Let's go ahead. These ones are going to be on the outside this time though. Like that. And those are even. So if I zoom in, I'm just going to look at this balance, see if I like it. See if there's any changes I can make. I could make a third striping, but I think that might be a little too much. I like this variation. Let's go ahead and actually select, is this the two, so that's the two outside ones. Are these the same color? Black. Black, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to put these two together and I'm just going to bump them out a little further, I think, and then do the same thing here. And then I'm going to have to select all four of these and make sure they're centered. And cool. I'm going to group all this, select them all, Command G, Command J to duplicate, Command E to merge, hide the group. So now we have this stripe on one layer. And I'm just going to save that and show you guys this because this in itself is actually a pretty okay design in my opinion. And there you go. That's pretty cool. So let's go back and let's continue to add on to this. So one thing that I've been doing recently with striping like this is taking elements of the logo and creating a pattern out of it and then using that as a layer mask. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Let me go ahead and drag this B. I did this with Nottingham Forest too, or something similar with their tree. I'm going to hide the logos on top there. And since this logo has this B in the middle, I'm actually going to get rid of the B because I don't want it interfering in the pattern. I think it might stand out too much and just, I want it all to be this jagged, or not jagged, but the linear edges. I don't want any of these rounded edges. So I'm just going to eliminate the B. And I'm just going to use the pen tool here. And I'm going to right click, fill, and since this is the black section, this is going to be black. This one will be white. And you can see I missed a couple spots here, but I don't think that it's going to affect anything. It's going to be very imperfect, but I'm not really going for precision for this stuff because it's going to be a mask. And it's going to be distorted anyway, and I don't think that blemish will affect anything. But this is going to be black. So there we go. We have the striping set up. I'm going to go ahead with the magic wand tool, go nice and simple, and select these black areas. Command C, Command V, and I'm going to delete the original. So now we just have this black blank logo. Now there's multiple ways you could like lay out a pattern with the logo. I'm just going to keep it very simple, and I'm just going to create a vertical glide reflection, I guess. I don't know what it would be called, but I'm gonna make probably what, like 6 of these. I'm gonna select them all and go to distribute horizontal so they're evenly spaced. Group them. I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 visible. I think that's all right. We'll do. I'm gonna align it like that. Command J, Command E to merge, so we have these on a layer, and I think I'm going to duplicate again and do like an like 2 side by side, because I think one down the middle is going to look a little funky. I think I need these stripes on the outsides with how layer masks are going to be, so that's how I'm going to line this up. So let's set that up. I'm going to put these on one layer, Command E to merge, and then bring up our stripe. And okay, let's just see what this looks like. So I'm going to hide that pattern we created. Pressing Command, I'm going to select it. Clicking the thumbnail, and then I'm going to go to our stripe and bring up the layer mask. So here we go. That's pretty cool. Inverse it. So yeah, okay. I think that looks good. I'm glad. Yeah, you can see the logo definitely looks better on the outside. So the middle is fuller, and then the outside has more negative space. But I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, and then we'll go to the top one. We're going to go Command I. And let's go ahead and click the link to unlink that. Select the layer, press Command T, right click, flip horizontal. That's pretty cool. And let's drag that layer then. Oh, actually, let's drag the layer mask rather down, or should we go up? Alright, let's go down. Actually, I'm going to put this behind, I think. Put it behind, redrag it, and let's do like that. That is pretty cool, I think. So we get this mix of colors and shapes that I really like. Maybe we do... I don't know. There's a few ways we could do this. I might just play around with this for a second. I think I like this the best. So I'm going to stick with this. And I think I need more volume in the middle here for a better balance. So I'm going to go back to our original stripe. The two thicker rectangles, our first two, I'm going to press Command J on those and bring them out. Then press Command T and holding Shift and Alt, I'm going to thin them out so they're just kind of in the middle here. Maybe go a little further. Or maybe we go further out. This is a nice layout. I'm pretty happy with this. And we're going to move on to the next step. Let's actually bring back our logos. That looks pretty okay. We're going to have to cut out that logo section, I think, actually. But I'm going to put all this in a group now. So this is a new stripe. Command J, Command E. So this is on one layer. And actually, let me hide the logos again because I think we need more variety on the outside here. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the rectangle marquee tool and cut some of these. So I'm going to select some pieces of these and I'm going to make them poke out a little further. So I'm just going to go in the middle of some of these diamonds. And I might have to go back and do this a little more precisely. I'm not exactly sure what this is going to look like. Okay, so I selected some of these bits. I'm going to press Command T, which will select those, and I'm going to hold Shift Alt and just drag them out. Interesting. I think that's pretty cool. Pretty happy with that. Let's go ahead and bring up our logos. I'm going to create a section here that I cut out for the sponsor, so let's just do that real fast. That's pretty cool. I might have to adjust it down just a bit. Oh, actually, let's move this back up. Let's bring this back. And, oh, okay, I actually like this way better. So let's put this down into the group because I don't like those being disconnected as far as they were. So I think it looks better if it's a little more connected. And I think that is the play. That I much prefer. Really like that. I think that is probably the final step in this stripe. Really, really like this. Yeah, I love this design, happy with it, but I think the rest of the shirt could use a little bit of something. All right, so now I want to create some sort of background pattern throughout the rest of the shirt, and there's a few ways you could go about doing it. One of the ways I like to do is, say, duplicate this stripe, drag it down to the bottom, and we're just going to use thin sections of it. So I don't care about making this blurry, so I'm going to press Command T and increase the size, do something crazy, and you could duplicate it multiple times throughout instead of increasing the size, but this is just one way to do it. I'm going to press Command, select that layer, press the layer mask, press Command I, and then going on the layer mask, I'm just going to go down a bit to create some thin lines, maybe over to the left a bit. Let's just see what this looks like. It's pretty cool. I could also do it like this. I don't know, set something up kind of wacky like this, and then duplicate, and I'm going to right click, apply that. Then I'm going to go to Filter, Distort Wave, and this is kind of a big layer right now, so this will take a second. Here are my settings right now. Maybe increase the amplitude a bit. All right, that's pretty interesting. Let me zoom out a bit. I'm actually going to decrease the size a little bit, maybe go back to this rotation. I'm just looking for a balance, like in a feel here. This isn't like I'm not going for looks yet, because I'm going to do more to it. I'm just trying to get the right balance to something I like. Okay, I think that's pretty close. And then I'm going to go to Filter, Distort, Displace. Now, if you don't have displacement maps, I have some on my Patreon if you're a member of that, and they're also in the PSG Kit Design pack on the Template FC store. At least the ones I use are there. You can also find ones online, but you can also make any PSD a displacement map. So this is one of my favorites here. It's in the abstract. There's 4 groups of displacement maps in the PSG Kit patterns pack. The abstract section, displacement 5, one of my favorites, but you can also find images like this on Google and make your own or whatever. But I'm gonna go ahead and do this. And I could do it another time. This is a little too thick. I would like it a little thinner. But it gets the job done, I suppose. I'm gonna select it and just kind of cut it a bit more to thin it out. Yeah, about there. And then apply that layer mask. Okay, so there we go. I'm happy with this as like a background. I probably wanted it more subtle. I would work through this a lot more in actuality. For tutorial's sake though, I kind of showed you the process of how I would go about doing this, and I think this is close to what I'd want. But then I would copy this to the sleeves. But before I do that, I actually want to try to make a texture with the stripe. And what I mean by that is I'm gonna command and select this background that we just created, go to our stripe layer, add a layer mask, command I to inverse it. And now we have a little bit of texture going on throughout the stripe, which I think really blends in this background pattern now. And that really only works if you have like a thinner background like we just created. But let's go ahead and grab this background layer, Command C. We can save this front layer while, and this will update. And then I'm gonna go to the sleeve, or both sleeves, and paste it in there to update the sleeves. There we go, pretty cool. Like I said though, that background I definitely want to tweak with it a little bit. The final thing I want to do here is add something to the sleeve trim, and I think I'm just going to add this center stripe to it, and I think that will be pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that layer, go to our cuff smart object, paste it, and we're going to have to really kind of fudge with it to get the sizing right. I want the green towards the top. How should we do this? I think that's pretty good. I think I'm going to favor the bottom a little more and do it like this. I'm actually going to delete the texture layer mask just so it's cleaner. I think that's good. I'm going to save one just to see what that looks like. Oh, I love that. Okay. And then just to have it even, I'm going to press Command A to select this, Command C, then go over to this other cuff, Command V to paste. Right click, or Command T, right click, and flip horizontal. So these should be dead even. And that's pretty good. I am very happy with that. I'll show you what the actual final product looks like then for you guys, but I'm very happy with that design. That's basically the process and some of the design techniques I use. Now I'm going to jump into some other quicker tutorials and talk through them while they're done a little quicker, to talk to you about some other techniques that I employ when I'm designing kits. All right, now I'm going to talk about 4 individual designs a little more quick. This one is the Bayern Munich home shirt, and I'm using the DOS World Cup template here. There's 3 versions of this, like a standard version, a hanger version, and a flat version. This is just the standard front. And you can see I'm creating this diamond shape from Bayern's badge and the Bavarian flag by creating 2 triangles, flipping one upside down, merging them together to create this pretty simple diamond shape. Nothing too crazy here, but then I'm going to duplicate that across horizontally. So I have a repeated pattern of these blue shapes throughout. And then I'm going to duplicate that line to create the same thing, but this time in white, and offset it so that the diamonds interlock with the blue ones. And in my design process, I thought I was going to just stick with these 2. So when I was designing this, I knew I wanted this shape and I wanted this kind of striping because it's similar to other shapes that Adidas uses in their designs, and I was trying to recreate an Adidas feeling shirt. So I had these 2 colored elements going across the chest below the logo and badge, and I thought this would be pretty cool. When I saved it and looked at it on the mockup, I thought it needed a little more, so I duplicated those elements again to add another row of each. So we have a blue, white pattern going on in these diamond shapes, and then I'm just making minor adjustments to the shape and the setup. At this point with the 4, when I was actually designing it, I thought it was too many shapes now, so I went from too few to too many. So I thought I'm gonna use some negative space now with these outer elements, the top blue and the bottom white, and use a layer mask to kind of break them up a little bit, so maybe I can find a balance that I like. So I opted to use a brush from the PSG Kit brushes, which is in the PSG Kit Kit Designer pack on templatefc.com if you're interested. Obviously it's a pretty simple brush, it's just a bunch of lines, so you could recreate this pretty easily. But I use that as a layer mask on both that top blue layer and that bottom white layer. And you can see it creates some negative space, and I inverted the layer masks too, so there was even more negative space in there. And I thought this balance was a little nicer and I liked it a lot better. So I'm going to group all those elements and then merge it into one layer so I can make a few more adjustments to make this fit better. So you can see the first thing I did here was add an arch warp to this. So that way it just bends around the logos a little nicer, and I have some more elements visible because the collar of the mock-up actually cuts off some of these elements. So I wanted them to all kind of be exposed the same amount and have a place where it started to vanish up on the corners of the chest. And for a design like this, you can see right now with the lines, they're actually not symmetrical because they're all at the same angle throughout. But I want them to be symmetrical on both sides, so I'm gonna kind of crop this element here onto a new layer, and then I'm going to split it in half, duplicate it, and flip it so both sides are exactly the same. So now that this is a fully symmetric shirt, and I like this symmetry here a lot better than the asymmetry personally. If it was a little more chaotic of a design, I might go for the asymmetric look, and if you like that look better, of course you can do that as well. The final step then is something that I like to do on a lot of shirts that have just one main focal element, and that's to add a subtle element in the background using that main element. Basically what I'm going to do is duplicate the element and duplicate it throughout the rest of the body. And then I'm going to merge those layers, press Command U on the keyboard and bring the saturation all the way down so it's gray, and just set that to overlay and adjust the opacity. So it's a little more subtle, but it repeats those elements, so if that subtle detail gets picked up, it matches our main focal element and adds a little bit of detail into the big space of color and breaks it up a little bit, which is what I like to do in a lot of these designs. And you can see that's pretty similar to the original. I actually flipped the direction of the lines, but you know, pretty close. The last thing I did here too, by the way, is alter the colors because I wasn't happy with how the colors look. So I'm just going to adjust the red, make it a little more saturated, make it a little more red because it was a little too pink for me. And then adjust the saturation of the blue as well to make it a little more blue and a little more saturated as well. So the Bayern home shirt was a little more simple. You can see that was just adding one element, making a couple adjustments and not going too crazy. Now I want to show you how I take an element or a pattern that I have of some sort when I don't really have an idea for a shirt and modify it to create an interesting design. So I'm going to show you how to do that on this Bayern third shirt. You'll notice I use some hue and saturations here to alter the color. So the color I'm going to be working in is different than what the final color will be. But I started off with a gradient background, which you can see is from my PSG gradients, also in the PSG Kit Designer pack. But this is like a sunset sort of gradient. So we have some oranges and then a pink corner. And what I'm going to use as a base pattern here is this Adidas St. Louis home shirt pattern, which is from the most recent patterns pack in Template FC store, the 2023-2024 patterns pack, part 1. And I'm going to open the single Illustrator file and take the main elements, duplicate them off to the left, and just take one of these vertical stripes and copy that and paste it over into Photoshop. So in actuality, this was a lot of trial and error with this design. I'm kind of gonna go right to the point here for the tutorial, but I'm gonna add it, I'm gonna make it a little wider and then put it on an angle and increase the size. So I probably started with it more straightforward across and then made it wider and angled later on, but I'm just going to go right to the point of it being angled and duplicating it and creating a pattern across the canvas here. Usually I would have a darker background and add the color to the elements that I'm adding, but since this element has more space, the negative space, I went with the element actually being the darker color. So I'm just going to modify and tweak this until I get a nice setup where I like the color balance of everything. You notice on this pattern, the shapes at the top are a little thinner, and then as you go down, the colors are like the boxes are a little thicker. So I want to get a good balance between the thin and the thick shapes. And I'm going to use the distribute spacing to get those evenly spaced out, so there's no kinks in that. Put it all in a group, duplicate and merge it. And with that merged one, I'm going to bring that down to the bottom and add a gray color to it and offset it just to add a little color variation in the dark colors. So I accidentally make this color a little too light. I come back and adjust it later on, but I'm gonna just offset it. And you can see that adds a nice little trim to the elements that breaks up the color a little more because I think the color was a little too dominant at this point. So I made that adjustment. And then I think the black's a little over dominant in its own right. So I'm gonna add another dark gray, and I simply selected the pattern and added a solid color. So I just created basically a duplicate of that pattern. And then I inversed the layer mask. So now the pattern is the colored elements essentially, but I'm gonna offset it so it's on the black. So we have the dark gray on black to add a little texture to that basically. You can see I made that gray a little too dark. Now I brighten it up and you can see that a little better. And that just adds even more texture. It breaks up that black a little bit. And I'm always just looking for the right balance of color, texture, these elements and things. This is what the final color scheme would look like then with these hues checked. But I did design it originally in this orange color scheme. The hues were added later. The final step on this one, I wanted to add a little bit more color, and one of my go-to techniques is to add particles. So I duplicated that gradient that was the background and brought it to the top, added a layer mask, and I'm going to go back to my brush pack and get one of these particle brushes, add those to the layer mask, and I'm kind of doing this backwards because I'm adding the negative space, and then I'm just going to go ahead and flip the layer mask then, so then it becomes the positive. And we have a little particle action going on. I try to not use particles as much because I used to use them a lot, so I try to really make them smaller. So I'm going to apply that layer mask, select the particles, and go to select contract, and just make them a little smaller and add that as a layer mask, just so they're a little thinner. I thought they were a little too dull there, so I duplicated it one time, so they're a little brighter, but they are smaller. And I think that is the right balance for this design. You can see pretty similar to the original, but the one thing that I didn't like was the gray I used on the initial light gray. So I'm gonna go back, darken that up real quick, and I think that looks much better. So recently I really like these grainy kind of elements in shirt designs. So that Bayern third kit had the grainy texture going on. This time I'm going to create my own grainy texture for this PSG home kit. And there's a few ways you can go about doing this. I actually have a grainy pack PSD on my Patreon and in the Quezi kit design pack. So you guys can use that there. But if you want to create them in Photoshop, you can go ahead. I'm creating a triangle here, and I'm going to create a gradient that goes from a color to transparent. So I'm going to add a red here. I'm going to go to that gradient and adjust the color a little bit so the color is a little more dominant than the transparency. As you can see, just drag that out so the location's around 5 instead of 0. Click OK and all that, and then make sure the fill's on 0 so it is properly transparent, and then you rasterize that layer. And to get the texture, you just have to set that layer to dissolve, which I will do at the end once I set up my shapes. So this is basically a random setup. I'm just kind of winging it with this. So I created this triangle shape. You can use any shape really to do this. The triangle, though, one of my favorite shapes to use. So I'm just figuring out a shape that I like, and then I'm duplicating and setting these triangles up throughout the whole canvas. And there's no real rhyme or reason. I'm just trying to make it have a good balance. I kind of know where I'm going with this design, which is putting it into some sort of stripe. At this point, I don't know exactly what that's going to be, but I know I can just do whatever and then it's going to be drastically altered anyway. So I just hope to get a good balance of color. So when it's altered, the color balance is still pretty interesting and good. So while doing this, I'm trying to have triangles that are next to each other not be on the same angle. I want them to be perpendicular to each other, not really parallel anywhere. Unless they're like intertwined, which I do that kind of below the badge there. But once I set them up and I'm pretty happy, which this part is pretty quick, I then select them all and group them and set them onto a dissolve layer so they have this texture. And I'm going to duplicate the group, press Command E to merge it, and then press Command A to select everything, and Command C and Command V to paste. And what that does is basically create a cropped version of that. So I do have a boundary box on the outside. So when I shrink this into a stripe, I do have some straight edges on the ends. And I'm going to create a rectangular shape here, which is going to be the base of my stripe here. PSG obviously has a main stripe. I was originally going to go down the middle with the stripe. I ended up changing it as I went on with this design. But I'm going to put that stripe as the same color blue as my background. And then I'm going to put my triangles above it and put them on a clipping mask. Now, at this point, I was going to just duplicate these triangles and spin them around so we had a bunch of different angular triangles, but I decided to just change the width and make them very thin. And I just needed to find the right balance of colors and things. So I messed around with this quite a bit, but you can see the quick little demonstration version of it. I duplicated it, flipped it, or rotated it 180 degrees, and then made it a little smaller in the middle. Then I'm going to duplicate the main one and make that one white, and this one's going to go on the edges to act as a trim to the red. I'm going to duplicate that white trim though a few times to get that from top to bottom on both sides pretty evenly. There's obviously gaps in the spacing and stuff, which is okay. But I wanted a decent amount of white intermixed there for a nice balance on the stripe. Once I'm happy with that, I could set some of these layers to dissolve. I don't do that though because the texture is a little much, but I'm going to group it, duplicate, and merge it as we've been doing. And then I'm going to skew it off to the right side so it's below the badge. And you can see it starts from the smaller normal stripe and it goes down to like a bigger shape, which I kind of like. It's based on a few PSG kits that do this. Once I'm happy with that setup, which took a little bit to get right, I'm going to duplicate that main stripe twice and duplicate it on both sides of that object we have. And I'm going to set both their saturations to 0, so they're gray, and set them to overlay and decrease the opacity. So again, we have a subtle texture going on in the background of the shirt. My final step was to add some particles, and I did this in a different way. I basically created a layer of particles that were the same color as the shirt, so that dark blue, and I added a bunch of small ones along the shape, along the object. And you can't really see these particles, but I'm going to duplicate the stripe and put it on top of the particles, increase the size, and put it as a clipping mask. So some of the colors come through, some of them are still blue, and it just adds a little bit of a particle effect to it that I think adds a nice texture and interest to the design. And you can see with a design like this that's so random in some of its steps, like setting up the triangles, you get really varied results. So you could do this 100 times and have 100 different designs, which is why some of these techniques are nice, because you can always go back to them if you're stuck or you just need something. The final design I'm going to show you guys is this Roma third kit, and this one's done in a different technique again, also using a pattern though, but you can see how I'll use up the pattern a little bit differently this time. So I'm actually using a pattern from the Classic Patterns Part 3 pack, and it's this Bragantino home pattern from 91. So I'm going to use the PSD and just copy that and paste it over into my canvas here. And I rasterize it and then increase the size, because when I just increased the size on that smart object, it was really big, took a long time. So I'm just going to go ahead, increase the size of it, and rotate it. And this is where I started with this design, not sure really where to go. I decided to create 2 stripes of Roma's colors, the red and the orange. And I'm going to use the pattern to create some negative space in these to create a interesting looking shape here and use it to create a chest piece, similar to what I did for the Bayern Munich home shirt. And I'm just going to line this up on the shapes of the pattern that I think it'll look best on, and then select the pattern while holding Command and set these as a layer mask on both of those rectangles. Inverse them so I have more negative space than positive. And I could have continued to adjust this layer mask to set it up in an even better way, which is what I did in the original. But for the tutorial, I just kind of carry on. Again though, I want to go for a symmetric look, so I'm going to merge the background layer and then use my technique where I just select half of it and duplicate it and flip it. So now we have a symmetric background, but I have to do that for the striping effect I'm creating too, or this chest design that I'm creating. So I'm just going to delete one side of the chest piece, and then I'm going to duplicate it 2 more times to create 3 of these objects on one side. And once I'm happy with their position, I'm going to select everything, duplicate, and merge it. And I thought the angles were a little too sharp, so I stretched it out a little bit to make the angle a little more horizontal, less steep of an angle. And that was about the extent of it. But that's it. Thank you guys for watching this tutorial. I know it was a long one, so thanks for sticking it through. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram if you want to see some more of my designs. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out on those platforms as well. You can also email me at thatsquezzy@gmail.com. But thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.